From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Is the Biden administration going after big tech consolidation with an antitrust lawsuit against Facebook, or is it breaking new ground and stretching the law in dubious ways? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. The Federal Trade Commission last month filed a lawsuit to block Meta, and this is the company that was formerly known as Facebook, from merging with a virtual reality company called Within Unlimited. And the argument is that, reading from the FTC here, would stifle competition and dampen innovation in the dynamic, rapidly growing U.S. market for fitness and dedicated fitness VR apps, unquote. And the Journal's editorial today says that this lawsuit deserves a burial in court. So, Alicia, can you just give a sense of what the story here is?
So Meta, formerly known as Facebook, has been moving increasingly into the metaverse, which is like virtual reality, augmented reality. It owns the top-selling headset, Quest 2, and also has an app store, though, unlike with smartphones, allows people to do side loads. So the FTC kind of dances around this in its complaint because it doesn't really have a vertical integration challenge. So when I first started looking into this, I thought, well, maybe they're claiming that Meta is trying to control all different levels of the metaverse. But what it's actually arguing here is that Meta's proposed acquisition last year, we don't know how much it was proposing to spend for it. That still hasn't been made public. But the acquisition would violate the Clayton Act by substantially reducing a competition in the app world. It argues Beat Saber, which is a Meta app, which allows people basically to kind of music and rhythm, almost kind of dancing, but not really punching targets as they come at them, would compete with the app, the popular app that Within Unlimited owns, which is Supernatural, which allows people to experience or to exercise with a kind of a trainer in an exotic location like the Great Wall of China or like Ethiopia, and do guided exercises, yoga, boxing. And so the FTC argument is that this would increase consolidation in the fitness market. Now, it actually kind of divides the fitness market into incidental fitness products and dedicated fitness products. Dedicated fitness apps would be such as Supernatural, whereas incidental fitness would be Beat Saber. That is basically people get some kind of a workout even though they're not trying to get a workout. But the FTC argues that it really doesn't matter, even though they could be two different markets, they're actually the same market and they directly compete. And therefore, the acquisition should be blocked. And there's some other arguments that we can get through, but that is the core argument it's making.
But that just explains part of why I'm generally skeptical of these kind of antitrust moves, is so much of it depends on how these markets are defined, what they're putting in is it the dedicated fitness VR market? Is the fitness VR market? Is it the VR market full stop? And the classic example of this in the public argument over these antitrust claims, Kim, in recent years has been Amazon. And Amazon, you hear figures that they're something like 40% of all e-commerce. And Amazon says, hang on, we compete against Walmart. We compete against the local hardware store. Personally, sometimes I look at something on Amazon and I decide it would be better for me to just go to the store and spend the 30 minutes it would take me to go buy it. Or maybe I don't trust the seller on Amazon's marketplace, so I buy it directly from the person that's manufacturing the product. And so, that's part of what the problem here with these antitrust insertions of government into the economy in this way is a lot of it depends on how you define the terms.
Yeah, it's entirely definitional. And by the way, my advice to Lena Khan, the FTC chairman, is to go actually put on an Oculus headset or a Meta headset. We actually own one and I use it a lot and I play Beat Saber. And yeah, I guess if you wanted to exercise with it, you could. You can also just stand there and wave your arm around a little bit because you're essentially holding a saber and you're trying to slash these blocks in half. It's almost sort of incidental moving, which is why indeed that category exists. The notion that this is some sort of fitness app, that people use it to engage in sort of more better well-being, and that is its main purpose. It's a game. And so that just underlines the degree to which they are using these definitions definitions and twisting them around in order to make the case against this acquisition. Because the bottom line is that Lena Khan doesn't like Meta. It doesn't feel as though Facebook should have been allowed to buy Instagram and WhatsApp. It feels that it's too big already, and she's going to send a message with this particular lawsuit. Even though the Democratic commissioners had to overrule their own staff to do it, their own staff didn't think that this should happen. And we've got now all these contorted arguments, not just the Clayton Act, but a bunch of other discredited antitrust theories as well, too, which Alicia could probably explain even better as to why they shouldn't be allowed to proceed.
Yeah, and Alicia, maybe you can answer my question about the market definition here. Is it VR full stop? We know that Meta has done a lot of investment in that category, but it seems like the FTC is pointing to a more narrow market. And then what about this issue that the editorial raises about potential competition? And I'll read a piece of the legal filing from the FTC. It says, the acquisition would cause anti-competitive effects by eliminating potential competition from Meta in the relevant market for VR-dedicated fitness apps. These include eliminating any probability that Meta would enter the market through alternative means absent the acquisition. So if I read that right, they're saying that Facebook is not even in this market currently.
Right, so which actually acknowledges that the first part of the lawsuit is dubious or has absolutely no merit, that the idea that Beat Saber competes with Supernatural, no, they don't. The way that they define the market is generally VR fitness apps. And there are actually a number of players in this beyond within. It has plenty of competition, though. Its Supernatural app is one of the more popular ones. Now, what the FTC is arguing here is that Meta, if left to its own devices and were not allowed to buy Supernatural or the Within Unlimited, it would essentially create its own app because it realizes that the fitness app is really important to expanding its foothold in the metaverse market. And so it would pour all this money. And we are actually seeing that. Meta is pouring a lot of money into VR, billions of dollars. In fact, it just issued debt for the first time, corporate bonds, in order to issue dividends while also increasing its capital inflows into Meta ambitions. But the FTC argues that it would actually be forced to create its own app, which would increase competition in the fitness market, the VR fitness market. This is its quote unquote actual potential competition theory. The second theory, which also relates to potential competition, is that the very fact is perceived competition, that the fact that Meta could develop its own app, that exerts actually kind of pro-competitive forces on the market, maybe by forcing other apps that are currently existing in the market to improve. And so there's a twofold argument here. These actually haven't been used for decades. I mean, to the extent that they are, it's usually much more narrow in the terms in the pharmaceutical space, where the FTC has sometimes sued drug makers who are trying to acquire a new drug that could potentially compete with something that they already have on the market. And there, I think that there could actually be a plausible ground that, because there is actual competition, that this newer drug actually could replace or could one-up one of their current drugs. But here, there really is no evidence of this. Under FTC longstanding guidelines, it would have to prove that Meta actually intended or was going to enter the market, and that this would have pro-competitive forces on the market, and also that no other company would be able to or would probably enter the market or be able to do so effectively. The problem here is that the FTC isn't able to do any of the above, doesn't show or actually meet its burden of proof. And that's probably because it actually didn't take testimony from Meta executives before filing the lawsuit. So it instead shifts the burden of proof to Meta, and which is why I think this could actually just be quickly dismissed in federal court. It goes to trial in December, just based on the fact that the FTC doesn't actually state or doesn't produce any evidence to support any of its claims.
But that's why this issue of potential competition, if it stands, strikes me as an expansion of the FTC's and the government's regulation of the private economy. And I'll just make up an example here. Let's say that Apple decided that it wanted to get into the electric car business, as has been rumored for several years at various times. And let's say they looked at their options and they decided that the best way for them to do that would be to buy Tesla because they already have a business, they already have a manufacturing facility, they already have a lot of the pieces in place. On this theory, the FTC would be able to block that because although Apple does not currently compete in the electric car business, it could theoretically take this pile of cash that it has and start from scratch and build its own electric car business from scratch. But it's hard to see how Apple's purchase of a company making a product that it doesn't compete in reduces competition. And Kim, it strikes me as extremely speculative that the courts would get in and block that kind of a purchase on some theories that the FTC has created.
Well, right, because as you say, and this is the important point, you could use it to block pretty much any acquisition ever. Because you are essentially requiring a company to prove a negative. You are essentially saying that if, in the absence of an acquisition, a company would obviously get into that market and obviously use its money to produce more competition. You can't prove that, nor can the company argue against that. They can't prove that they definitely wouldn't do that. So there's absolutely no winning if you are the company, and it's an abusive theory. It's why courts have looked so dimly on it. Those two theories that Alicia were talking about have been used before and used by regulators to stop mergers until the logic behind them and the very bad economics behind them were studied more by scholars. And in turn, judges started looking very poorly on most of those theories. So I think Alicia's right that if this standard were allowed going forward, it would give the FTC extraordinary power to essentially just block any merger that it didn't like without having to kind of prove anything about the real questions in antitrust, which, let me remind everyone again, is the standards for this is, does it truly reduce competition or does it harm consumers? There's very little in this deal that suggests either things would happen. And so that's why they're grasping at these very outdated and very illogical antitrust theories.